slavery to build a nation. You hear about its sister states, and sometimes we need to go and look at the translation of things. Things they did, the gods they worshiped, the glory, the glam, and the glitz, all takes us back to Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 12. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, Put, Canaan. And the sons of Cush were Seba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabteka. And the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Now, note that it says the beginning of his kingdom. And we go down to 11, and it says, out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah, the same is a great city. So Nimrod had a way, and his family members after him and before him had a way, and this way had prevailed. As we see in Genesis, they built cities and sister cities and cities the like of the one that they called Babel. And in Genesis 11, verse 1 through 4, it says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And that's kind of the setting and the storyline. Even though our story takes place somewhere else, it's still in the same place. We go to Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 3, it starts again in this same area of the Bible that we started off in Genesis. So as we go to Daniel 3, I'll begin to read as you catch up. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. In verse 3, then the princes and governors, captains, and judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psalmistry, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So now we have the story setting. We know that this place that they built and where they were, even the name was not new. It had been there before because it had been started by some that wanted to go their own way and against the way that God had set out, namely Nebuchadnezzar and namely Nimrod. Now, at this point and at this time in Daniel, there was once again rule, as I would say, over the whole earth as we know it. And their way of war and worship had prevailed. And now we see them installing that way through worship. And we go down to verse 12 in Daniel, and it says, there are certain Jews thou hast set over the affairs of the province Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So what happened? We know the story. God comes to the rescue for the whole assembly to see and to know that he is God. But if we go down and we continue in verse 28, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's words and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in their province of Babylon. So, what do we see and what don't we see is the question, right? We see that if we go back, as I always say, their names were changed to coincide with their gods and the worship. Because what was their names before? If you look at their names before and you go and you translate it in the Hebrew, it'll tell you that their names meant that they were dedicated to God, the Hebrew God. But when you go and you translate these names that they had gotten, they do that for their gods, the gods of Babylon. And so when we get down here, they don't really, if you notice, even Daniel's name was changed, but they would always call him Daniel still. Did you guys notice that? When you read through the story, it's like, wait, they gave him a different name, as you know, God gives different names. When he named Abram Abraham, did he continue to call him Abram? He did not. Sarai, did he, once he changed the name, does he use the old? You know, even with Jacob, he had renamed him what? Israel. But we notice here that even the Babylonians still use the name Daniel. And I thought that was kind of cool, because names are meaning. So even when they wanted to change the names of these gentlemen to mean something else that they gave power to, we see here God still allowing them to use their real name, you know, of Daniel. And so their way was established. They had conquered and become the greatest dominant power, and even built wonders. I think it is said that it's either the seventh or something like that, greatest wonder, you know, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And we know that in scriptures, the head of gold, when the world was one under this dominion. And we go down to verse 28. And it says, then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, well, we repeat that, what he said about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, the God that they served, and what would happen if you went against that God, all the way down through 30. Now, if you know that story, you should probably know the story from the chapter prior in Daniel 4. If you go there to Daniel chapter 4 and drop down to verse 30, I'll give you a little bit of time to get there, you'll start to notice something else. The king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Now, this is what Nebuchadnezzar had been saying prior to building the statue. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O king, Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. So he's uprooted. His family has taken control of his kingdom. His son is at war and left the grandson to rule. And we find ourselves in the palace at this great feast in chapter 5. And it begins, that's where we will begin the story that we're going to stay at. Let me know with an amen when you're in chapter 5. Okay. Out of Jewry, out of their customs, the lands, and the way of living. They had found favor once and been tested as their way, and were found 10 times better than the others. And this is when they just tested them from coming out of bondage and coming out of slavery, and said, you know what, we're going to put you guys with us. You know, we'll take the king and all the special people that came from your kingdom, and we'll add them into ours. You know, but we're going to test you. And when they tested him, even when you guys remember the story, I'm just kind of doing it verbatim. They asked for a certain diet. They asked for certain things that they weren't willing to do, and the king granted it. And so when he did that, they were tested and were found 10 times better than the others. This didn't prevent them from being thrown into the fiery furnace or the lion's den. If you follow God's way, you will suffer persecution. I think that's something we all know, as I smile as I say it, you know. But God will see you through. And in Daniel 3, he had repeated, he said, blessed be the God of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Something we don't put enough value on is who God is. And he said what he would do if people had gone against him, because why? Because he said he is the real thing. And now we go with the value. If you're going to put value on God, you're going to have to put value on things that he represents. So you're going to have to put it on his law and his word. And a lot of the things that you find that you have to put value on that are of God, are they visible or invisible? I'll give you a second. You had to think about it, right? Now, how do you put value on things that are invisible? Faith, right? You value your breath, the breath that you're breathing. Can you see it? Right? So you can kind of tend not to have that much value on it until you can't breathe, right? So it's invisible, but you have to begin to put value on these things. And with God, most of the things are invisible. If you know the stories, this is why I do it verbatim, is because most people know these stories. And so something we need to put value on is the invisible. Now, after this story, there was wine being drunk, funny taste, and things like that. Party was going on, and the king in place had an idea from the depths of hell, probably Satan himself, wanted to demean the value in the things of God. The things they had taken from the temple. Remember? They had taken the stuff and then they had put it into their temple. And these were things that the Israelites and others gave praise to God with, and worship and sacrifice. And a worldly, earthly king, I guess, had been peeking in on the treasures of that unique conquest, because he obviously was raised in the palace. So in chapter 5, we'll go there, verse 1. Belteshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, I apologize. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes and wives and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes and wives and his concubines drank in them. Now, that was not all they did, but those same lips that uttered those fateful words to bring those vessels, and now using those same blasphemous words to praise the gods that they knew and gave ambience to: gold, silver, brass, iron, wood, and stone. Who were these gods? Do we know these gods? I mean, the Bible speaks a few times that every time people turned away from God, they would go to the gods of gold, silver, brass, iron, wood, and stone. The way of Cain, but more or less the ways of Lamech and his indoctrined family. The things that they were doing had transcended to forge and dedicate of those spirits, or what would you call them, fallen angels, as gods, and performing acts for their success. So the reason for doing all this was that they were being successful in a worldly way, as we saw with Nimrod, because he founded cities. And the like of those cities, they had sister cities, so he wasn't the only one. It was a way. And what value had they placed on the items of the temple that they took from Jerusalem? You see? Those are things you can actually see, but they weren't seen because they had taken them and put them away. But had they put value on them? I mean, picture it. You're sitting there. He's having a party. He has all of his lords and everything. Isn't that what we heard about Nebuchadnezzar? Isn't that what he had when he built the statue? He had everyone there. And so now here's this grandson. He has everyone here. And he's just sitting here, and they're drinking, and they're drinking, and they're drinking. And he says, you know what? Something's amiss. Something tastes off about this cup. Probably, I mean, it's Babylon, right? And at that point in time, how rich was Babylon? Right? They ruled the world. They were ahead of gold. You know, like I said, they had wonders there. So what kind of cup is he drinking out of? Right? I mean, it's a king's cup. What would make him drink out of that cup and all of a sudden say, you know what? Why don't we go get the cups that we brought from the children of Israel? You know, where would that thought even come from? Wouldn't a kingly cup or a king's cup be just as good? Well, I think, like I said, they had placed maybe an unsaid and unspoken value in those treasures. So we need to go back to figure out why. And that leads us to Moses, where these items had been made already. So in Exodus 25:40, you don't have to go there. I'll just read it. And look that thou make them after their pattern, which was showed thee in the mount. So Moses makes these things that you have seen in heaven, is what God is telling him as they're beginning to build and make these things for the temple. God placed the knowledge of those things on the people who would make them and what they represented. But did Moses make these items? You remember the story? God says, hey, Moses, you know, I want you to make these things for this temple, but I want you to make them on the way that I showed you how they look in heaven. But at what point did you see Moses actually make them? He didn't. How were they made? Do you remember? The Lord put knowledge on the people that would make them. Now, what just happened? Is that, again, putting power on the unseen? How many people like me were reading that and said, man, I'm today, this is what, 2023. And you still believe that you have to go to school to learn things, right? Or you just have to just learn. You're always learning. You're always learning. But here it says that God can put it on your heart at that moment, at that time, to know how to do these things. So now, is there or should there be a value for the unseen things of God? If he can do that, there's a lot of value there, right? And he did so in making these items. So what's so special about these items? Daniel 5, verses 5. In the same hour, fourth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against the other. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed in scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now you have to pause there. Why? Because a lot is going on. All of a sudden he has this, what he thought was a great idea. Let's take these items from the temple and let's pass them around and let's drink at knees instead of what we already have. And at that same hour, hand appears and starts writing on the wall. What would you do? In a situation like this, right? They had put value on those items. Was it rightfully so? Yeah, it was. That they had put value on it, but they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Leave it alone. So the value they put on it was to use it, and use it for eating and for drinking for all these people. And as soon as they did that, there's writing on the wall. So, of course, you read it with me. His knees, well, what's number one? First of all, it happened immediately. It was in that hour. Second, you see a man's hand. Has anyone ever seen something like that? And why a man's hand? You think that speaks to how we're wonderfully made? Are we in the likeness of that hand that wrote that? So you're starting to see things of God. His countenance changed. Where do you hear about countenance? First, changing. Wasn't it Cain? Cain and Abel, right? His countenance fell. And people wonder how we know what the Bible is saying when you read words and things like that. Well, the Bible is consistent. So if you didn't read it there, you'll see it later. His countenance fell. So obviously there's something wrong. His thoughts troubled him, right? And his joints and his loins, were loosened. What does that mean? Anyone? Yeah, right? Because you could lose your joints, right? And nothing happened. But it's saying specific joints. So most likely he probably soiled himself, as you said, right? Now, all of this happened just from drinking in the cups, right? What did they think they would gain by doing this? Do you think that things would taste different? You know what? I'm a lot more drunk now that we use those. What do you think? What was their thinking for doing something like this? You figure the first thing he would do after he soils himself or his loins were loose is maybe go clean himself up, right? That's not what he did. So I'm giving you this picture for a reason. Why? Because it must have been a sight to see all of these things happening at once. But it wasn't new, because in their way, they would do things like that all the time. They would drink, they would get drunk, they would eat, they would do all these things. Then you know what they do? Throw up and keep going. So it wasn't that far off for him to stand there that same way and continue to try to control the whole situation. So in Daniel 5:7, it spoke of clothing with scarlet. And where do you hear something about that in the Bible? In Revelation, right? So this scarlet color has a representation that has gone from the beginning of the Bible all the way through, but you're seeing it brought up here as something that's important to them, right? So if you can do this, I'll definitely give you one of these. We don't know what color the robe was that who had in their tent. They had gone and conquered a city, and this person grabbed some things and put it in a tent. What did he put? What did he take? Babylonian robe, right? Priestly robe. Wonder what color it was. Didn't say, but you see the likeness of everything coming back. And what else? Wasn't it money? Right? Gold and silver? Yeah. So are these things or ways that have prevailed through time as being a part of that way? They are. And they're things you can see. And so the gold chain, rulership, third in command, lets you know what I said from the beginning about his family and was he the king? You know, because that brings up a question, because they can say you're the king, but wasn't David the king, but Solomon was the king at the same time? So how does it work out? Well, yes, and he admitted it right there. You'll be the third ruler, not the first ruler. Okay, well, who's the second? You see? So something is missing again. Were they able to tell what it was? We'll see. Daniel 5:11. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him. Who the king, Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, right? And followed up there, it says, I say, thy father. So it's said twice. The king, thy father, I say, thy father. So therefore, you get the order of 1, 2, and 3. Nebuchadnezzar had begun everything. He was the one who had captured them, and we heard all of the things that he had did. And here she is explaining to her grandson why this person was made master of the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. There is a man, one man, the spirit of the gods is how she saw it. Thy father the king twice, meaning granddad, made master of who? Of those that we just said. Now, was he demoted? How was he not invited to this party? And he's their boss. Do you think about it like that? It seems as if she had come in and given some type of order. It doesn't seem like she was at the party either. But when she came in, she was being very specific about who was in charge, who was doing what, and that this Daniel had been placed above everyone that the king had called in. So how is it that Daniel was overlooked? You guys ever feel like that? At work, at home, at church, different places that you go, you know? It's something that everyone feels here and there. And so we'll continue. Verse 12, for as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he shall show the interpretation. Did you see it? Did she call him Belteshazzar? She said his name was changed. Yeah, we still call him Daniel. You know why? Because that name had more meaning to what they understood. Now, you must be allowed to be put down to be lifted up by the Almighty and his purpose, not our own. So, verse 13, then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king, my father, brought out of Jewry? Think about it. He unsoiled himself. They got the items from the temple, the writings on the wall. He's called all these soothsayers, Chaldeans, and everybody to come give him the interpretation, the astrologers. No one's able to understand anything that's going on. She comes in, explains everything. How did she speak about Daniel? She gave him his honor, right? How does he speak about Daniel? Read it again. Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? Pause. Did he just praise Daniel? Did he give him his props? He said, oh, you that Daniel. And you think, oh, yeah, that's me. But the one we brought out of slavery. The ones that we changed over from being Jews to being Babylonians. You see that? You have to be put down to be uplifted. So that you may know that God is God. So in verse 14, it says, I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that the light and understanding and excellent of wisdom is found in thee. Okay. So if you have heard of this Daniel, why wasn't Daniel called? You heard of him. You knew all these things, but you have your own way. You have soothsayers. You have the Chaldeans. You have others, astrologers, everyone else. When they went to find Jesus, where did these wise men come from? The east, right? Presumed to be closer to Babylon, yeah, than Israel. And when they came, how did they come? What were they doing to be able to even know that Jesus was going to be born? They were what? Studying the stars, right? And did they find him? Yes, they did. So what makes you think that some of these ways that they had been doing hadn't been working? Didn't I just say they were number one? They ruled the whole world by using these ways. So is he ready to come out of his way just because he's heard of Daniel, heard all this wisdom and everything is in him? Obviously, he doesn't respect any of it, because when Daniel came, the first thing he did was put him down, right? But it's found in thee, in verse 15. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, and that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now, if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed in scarlet and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. So, is this a complimentary conversation? No. I brought it in. I know who you are, but I'm going to speak to you as such, because we brought you out of slavery. We brought you from what you were doing and changed your customs. Not only that, but we have our own way. And I had them come in before you, but they couldn't do it. But did he say that their way was wrong? No. And so now we bring you in. You're another option. You come in, and if you can do it, if you can, even though I've heard of you and you should be able to, I'll give you these things. You've heard of people giving a reward before, right? Right? Daniel says something about the gifts. You remember Abraham? When he had to go and save his nephew Lot and all of them, and the king comes out and he says, hey, you can keep all the money. You keep all the stuff you brought, but give us the people. Right? And what did Abraham say? I've already made a promise to God. I wouldn't take nothing from you. Right? So you can say that you've made Abraham rich. So you hear where they try to give these gifts, and people of God are like, no, I'm good. I could do it without it. So in 17, Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy reward to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king and make known to the interpretation to him thereof. So with God's people, things are free, right? The word is free. You can't pay me to tell you the interpretation of something. We should want to do that, right? Isn't that what it's for? And so he says, nah, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the interpretation. And in 29, we see the result of it. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius, the Median, took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So what do we see here? We see the value of things. And then I know it goes quick, but I go quick because of time and because you already know the story. And the point of the story isn't to focus on the things we already know. It's to focus on putting value on the things of God and making a way for him to be able to use you in all sorts of places by taking the attention off yourself and leaving with it with him so that he can come to your rescue. And in this situation, we see the story and the setting, and it even started off in a good way where Nebuchadnezzar was speaking about the God of Daniel and his people. And still he made an image, and still he fell, and still had to learn again that no, there's only one God. And as he did that, he had already been run out of the kingdom. His son takes over, and instead of his son dilly-dallying around, what does he do? Because we know that there are other great cities around, they go to war, right? Because that's what it's about. It's about conquest. You know, it's not about tilling the ground and working and things like that Cain had already denied. He didn't want to be a shepherd, and he had failed at being a gardener, right? So what's left? You know, what do you see in the old days? They take those plowshares and they take those things they're using to farm with, and they turn them into what? You see, when one doesn't work, try the other. You see, so the son goes off to war. And as he's off at war, he leaves control to his son. Now, if you read up in history, because you probably won't see a lot of this in the Bible, but while he's at war, his son does what he does, goes against God, and the Medes and the Persians stopped the water from coming into Babylon and came right up under the gate, right? And took the city. But this was something you could not get into. So you can best believe that they safeguarded those things that they were allowed to come in. And now, who's stuck outside? The king. Why? They've sacked the city. They're in the city. They can defend from the city. So even if the king comes back, he can't get in. They're coming from war. They have no provisions, nothing. So just like that, their kingdom is done. You see? So when we place things on the unseen and we put value on the things of God, it may seem, like I said, in our lives that things aren't looking up. We can't get the respect. People are always putting you down and seeing you in the light that they would like to see you in and comparing you to the ways that the world compares you. Then you understand that it means nothing, because the things that really mean something are the things that are unseen, or the things that we put our faith in, our trust in. And that's the Holy Spirit. And it says that the world cannot receive the Holy Spirit. Why? Right. He's invisible. Right? Yeah. So he who has eyes, let him see. So that is the whole point of the story. That's the whole point of this whole thing, is that if the world can put value on things of God, why can't we? Why is it so tough to put value on things that are unseen? You know, the king even came forward and said, hey, if anyone talks about this God or goes against this God that is Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we're going to cut them in pieces. We're going to make his house a dunghill, right? And what ended up happening? He was chased off. He went his own way. He sinned. And his sons followed the same thing. And obviously God put an end to it. Now, even though they put all these things on Daniel, did it matter? It wasn't like he wanted it. And what happens when Darius comes in? Because technically Daniel's the king. Right? Technically. Because they killed the son, right? And the grandson. So Daniel's king. But where did they put Daniel? Right where he was, in charge of everything else. And Daniel's able to survive how many kingdoms of conquest? Right? So can God do that for us and for our situations? Regardless if you're working 12, 14-hour days, they don't want to give you your money. As a matter of fact, you just like a door guy. Right? But God will see it through. And the most impressive thing that I think of it all is what they saw and what they knew of Daniel. And if only they could speak of us like that, where, he says that the light is in you, the spirit, for as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding and interpreting of dreams and showing hard sentences and dissolving doubt were found. That makes even this thing that we do see more valuable. And it's my prayer that we continually use the unseen and the seen things to testify of the things of God, that we may be able to give understanding to people. Amen.